Welcome everybody. Happy Saturday. I'm Heidi Harmon, Mayor of San Luis Obispo. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday evening to spend it with us, listening and learning about this really important conversation. I think this conversation couldn't be happening at a better time, really, because imagine if contributing to local business also meant becoming a co-owner in it, a partner in its future alongside the people running it. Co-ownership can also encourage neighbors to start buying at local businesses again, even when it might be easier to stay home and order online. Enabling employees to co-own their workplaces could have similar effects, inviting workers into a full partnership in the challenges and sacrifices that the current moment may require. And so studies suggest that transitioning to full or partial employee ownership improves workers' productivity and resilience. So whether we eliminate COVID-19 or learn to live with it, the time for relief will soon turn into a time for recovery. And we need to act now if we want that recovery to steer us towards a fairer economy than the one that has made this crisis so painful. So laying the groundwork for new ownership movement can go a long way towards that end. So cooperation contains a mechanism that is inherently democratic, participatory, non-discriminatory, with a concern for community. And the cooperative model can organize our community markets, putting them under democratic control, bending the economy to meet our needs, our human needs first. And so our purpose today is to identify kindred spirits on the Central Coast who would like to promote cooperations for all aspects of our material needs. And this is our first meeting to start the process of founding a democratic organization that will achieve these goals. And we can start by looking at existing cooperatives in our region. The secondary cooperative can organize both existing cooperatives and individuals interested in supporting cooperative formation. The secondary cooperative is a co-op made of co-ops. It's like a Russian nesting doll sort of situation, enabling them to work together to promote their sales and services and to support the education of the community on the cooperative model. So our timeline today is a short one. It's only going to be about an hour or so. And so sticking with our goal of introducing the concept of a democratic secondary cooperative, we've chosen guests that are perfectly suited to discuss this topic and to lay some groundwork so that we can start building cooperatives here on the Central Coast. And so our principal guest today is Adam Trott. Adam first visited a Slow Speaks event in 2017 where he organized a workshop sharing ideas from his book, Building Cooperative Power. Adam is also the Director of Member Relations for Shared Capital Cooperative, a national loan fund that connects co-ops and capital to build economic democracy. He is also the Executive Director of the Valley Alliance of Worker Cooperatives, a secondary co-op of worker co-ops that supports, develops, and educates for and about worker cooperatives. Adam spent 13 years as a worker member of Collective Copies, a collectively managed worker co-op and union shop offering full service printing and bookbinding services in Western Massachusetts. And he received a master's in cooperative and credit union management from St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2019, and was the proud recipient of the Sid
Pohushki.
Thank you. I didn't listen to the pronunciation 10 times today. Okay, thank you. Yep. We will also also hear from local leaders in the cooperative movement, including one of our co-organizers, Travis Higgins. Travis has been promoting local shared ownership since he moved here just over a year ago. Travis, honestly, I've never seen anyone come to this town so quickly and do so much. So congrats to you. Prior to moving here, Travis spent time in Brazil where he received a BMA in Strategic Management of Cooperatives. And finally, but certainly not least, we have a very special appearance to introduce the webinar from Professor Richard Wolff. After getting his MA in economics under Paul Baran, his PhD at Yale, he and a cohort of radical economists formed the core of the economics department at UMass Amherst, where he taught until 2018, retiring with Emeritus status. Now at the New School in NYC, Professor Wolff heads up Democracy at Work, dedicated to exposing our current systemic flaws and how democratizing the workplace is the cure. His nationally syndicated show, Economic Update, is produced weekly. So our schedule this evening is a brief lecture by Professor Wolff, followed by a local review with Travis, and then a conceptual description of secondary cooperatives by Adam Trott. And then I'll hope that you all will jump in with questions and comments for Adam and Travis. And so remember, our purpose here is to let you know that this is the start of creating an organization that will support and promote cooperatives here on the Central Coast. So with that, Professor Wolff, please take it away.
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and my hat and everything else is off in appreciation for what you're doing, for gathering people to talk about this, to work on this, both people who are new to the whole idea and those who've been working for a long time. This is exactly what our organization has been trying to encourage, stimulate, celebrate, people getting together and beginning to find a way out, a new way to organize work, but also the society. You know, work is a central part of our lives. 5 out of the 7 days, the best hours of the day, most of us who are adults anyway, go to work. And how that work is organized and how that work functions shapes everything else in our lives. And we would be naive to imagine that if the workplace is, for example, hierarchical, if a small number of people make all the decisions, an owner, a board of directors, major shareholders, whatever that small group is, if they make all the decisions and they're not accountable in these decisions to the vast majority of people who work in every workplace, that opposite of democracy is certainly going to make it very hard to get a real democracy anywhere else in the system. And I think we live in that kind of contradiction. So let me make a short case for why I am celebrating what you are doing. And it has really 2 parts. The first part is to talk about, in an honest way, where we are in the world of our economic system, this capitalist economic system that all of us have lived our lives in. And that's the first part. And the second part is how we get out of the mess we're in, where we go now, what's the new direction that we need to take and that the cooperative is absolutely crucial for. Okay, so the first part. No statistic sums it up better than the following. The United States has a little about 4.5% of the world's population, but we currently have 25% of the world's COVID cases and a roughly the same percentage of the world's COVID deaths. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We have all the capabilities necessary to have prepared for this virus. We know that viruses are part of the human condition. We had a terrible one back in 1918 that taught us a great deal, and we've had literally dozens of viral problems around the world ever since. There is no excuse for not being prepared. We have the capacity to be prepared. We could have, and we should have, and we failed. Something went disastrously wrong, and we have 188,000 people in this country, our fellow citizens, who are dead as a result of that failure to prepare. We also failed, however, to contain the virus after we had failed to prepare for it. We still do not have testing for the majority of the American people. We do not have a clear mandate, neither from the federal government nor from many state governments, as to how to mobilize the public and the private resources to contain this disease, to stop it from killing so many of our fellow citizens and hurting so many tens of thousands more. And that's a failure too. And I'm not interested in blaming this one or that one, because I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is we have a systemic problem. And let me drive the point home just with a few more pieces of hard information. Corporations and businesses in America are deeper in debt than they have ever been in the history of the United States. Not only are corporations in debt, businesses large, medium, and small, but increasingly that debt is owned by the government. There isn't anymore the ability or the willingness of private funders to provide an adequate amount of lending to private corporations and businesses. The government has put corporations on life support, literally shoveling the endless amounts of money that the Federal Reserve, our central bank, has been producing in recent years, which is in the trillions of dollars, and pumping that into the economy, basically sustaining the financial markets. As if that weren't bad enough, even before the pandemic, there were all kinds of other supports that the government did. The tariffs that President Trump imposed on virtually everybody was a direct government intervention to support, as the president said, American business, already supported by all that money lent to them, now also trying to shape the markets that they face, and I'm not even beginning to be done. Here's a couple more that have come up in the pandemic, but that show you how desperate the situation is. The only thing that has sustained the retail sector of the American economy over the last half a year has been government money, the $600 extra to unemployed people that ran out at the end of July, the moratoria on paying rent, the forbearance on paying back your mortgage if your home is assured by the federal authorities that are in that business. I mean, everywhere you look, the so-called private capitalist economy is on life support. It cannot cope with this pandemic. It couldn't cope very well with the crash back in 2000, what we now call the dot-com crash. It couldn't cope very well with the much worse 2008 subprime mortgage crash. And now it is proving, even though it is pumping even more money than it did before, it is proving that this, the third and the worst crash in this new young century, it can't cope with that either. I mean, this is extremely severe. Good estimates indicate that large numbers of the medium and small businesses that have had to shutter their doors or to cut back over the last 5 months will never return. There isn't the economic foundation enabling them to do that. And very little is being done about that. And I'm not even going to get into the dozens more ways in which this capitalist system is on life support. Well, what about the good news, you might say? Where are things going in a direction that at least some might call positive? Well, I'll give you two. One is the stock market. Yes, the stock market, if you ignore last Thursday, which you shouldn't, but if you do, the stock market has been doing real well. And there is no mystery at all about it. When the Federal Reserve pumps trillions of dollars into the economy, as they did since the last week of March of this year, that money has to go somewhere. Where is it going to go? It isn't going to go to produce more goods and services, not in an economy that has just seen over 50 million people file for unemployment compensation over the last 6 months. That's an economy where people are spending less, not more. That's an economy that is promising to shrink, not grow. And so money is not going to go into producing more goods and services for a population and an economy that sees no way to buy them. So where is the money going? Answer: the money is funneled into the stock market. The Federal Reserve makes trillions of dollars available. The interest rate you have to pay is at historic lows, barely above zero. So what has happened is not at all surprising. Bankers, insurance companies, wealthy individuals, hedge funds borrow limitless amounts of money at virtually no interest rate and pour it into the one place where you can make money. They buy stocks. And you know who they buy it from? Other people who have done exactly the same thing, borrowed money at low interest rates. They buy and sell stocks to each other, bidding up the price with each transaction. The money pouring in enables them to do that. And each of them is happily looking at the prospect of selling the stock they buy now at a higher price 3 weeks, 2 months, 6 months from now. That's why the stock market keeps going up, because the fountain of money keeps being pushed in. This has a name in economics. It's called a bubble. And I hope you all remember what happens to bubbles from your history courses. They burst.
Dr. Wolff, I know you have to go, and I know we have kind of a full schedule, but can you just spend the last maybe 2 minutes talking about, one of the things, in a position of local leadership for myself, we're getting into this, economic recovery conversation. And to me, it seems like not just recovery, but it's an opportunity to reimagine what it is to actually have a local, thriving, regenerative local economy. And can you just briefly help people that might be new to this conversation, that might be on this call, understand why cooperatives, why you're so excited and so supportive of cooperatives, and how in a town like ours, this might be the exact best thing for us to really invite into the conversation about economic recovery and reimagining?
Sure. The problem of all of the things I was saying is that we have a system that has been driven by private profit, by individuals saying, I am going to go into a business if and only if I can make a profit out of it. I want to pull more money out than I put in. If I can do it, I will. If I can do it, I'll hire people. But if I can't, I won't. And that system is now exhausted. Here was the problem always with it, but the problem is serious now. When a private person makes that calculation, all that he or she cares about are the revenues they get, the benefits they get from the business. It's not possible for them to monetize all the other benefits. So I'll give you an example. If you hire 5 people to produce something in your community, you may be training those 5 people in all kinds of skills that will be very useful in the years ahead, that will have good impact on their relatives, their friends, their children. All of those things are extremely valuable, and they may be more valuable than whatever the private profit is to whoever the employer is. But the employer can't monetize all of that, so the employer might decide to end the business, to fire the workers, because it isn't privately profitable, even though if you kept those workers there and you, for example, gave them the support to continue the business, the benefits to the community are much larger than the loss to the individual. In a private capitalist system, there's no way to capture that reality. But if you have a community that supports a business that is not only interested in the profit and loss for the business, but in the whole network of benefits that come to a community from having a viable business that teaches young people or old people new skills, that develops capacities for management, that can be linked up with other enterprises, you could have economic development without having it held hostage to the private profit calculations of individual businesses. Look, out of feudalism, capitalism came, the individual took the risks, the individual set up the business, it worked. It worked well, it worked for a while, but it is now exhausted. Every economic system, not just capitalism, slavery, feudalism, any of them, they were born, they evolved over time, and then they passed away and were replaced by something else. Capitalism is no different from all of the others. It was born, it has evolved over time, it is now exhausted. All those things I mentioned earlier, the failure to prepare for the virus, the failure to contain it, these are evidences of exhaustion. They are evidences that the system is not adequate to take care of the needs, public health, public employment, public well-being that we have as a society. And we have every right as a community to say, if the system isn't adequate to our needs, let's question, challenge, and change the system. I personally am convinced, by everything I've done as an economist all my life, that the collective or cooperative way of organizing business to make the workplace a genuine democratic community, one person, one vote, making the basic decisions. What are we going to produce here? How are we going to produce it? Where are we going to produce it? And how are we going to use the revenues that our productive work generate? Those questions answered by the whole cooperative in an enterprise and shared in its decision-making with all the other enterprises and with the larger community, that will be a much more effective use of our resources and our labor than what we now see our system unable to do. Let me conclude by telling you about one particular body of research that will help and that you may get in contact. The person here is a professor of business at a business school. The school in question is the University of Leeds in England, L-E-E-D-S. It's an old British university. The professor's name, she is a woman. Her first name is Virginie, that's the French version of Virginia. And her last name is Perrotin, P-E-R-O-T-I-N. Being a business school professor, she went out over recent years to compare and measure the productive efficiency, the survivability of enterprises. And she chose enterprises that were organized as worker co-ops in one case, and then other enterprises that were organized as top-down hierarchical typical capitalist enterprises. She chose them that they were the same size, they produced basically the same commodity, so she could really compare. She wanted to see what was the truth. And her research, which I urge you to learn about, and I'd be glad to help you to connect to her, her results were unambiguous. Co-ops were more efficient, they got more output per unit of input, they lasted longer than the capitalist enterprises, and the people working in them loved their work experience in a way that was never matched in your typical capitalist enterprises. They were happier people, they were better neighbors, better citizens, they were part of a community that was as democratic in the workplace as it ever was in the residential communities. And this ability to establish real economic democracy around the model of the co-op, that is a way forward. It's not relying on the government to magically solve our problem. And it's not a marginal fix here or there, this law, that. This is a really big change, which I know scares some people. But I'm hoping that folks now see, especially with this pandemic, that our problems are not minor, and they're not marginal, and they're not suitable for a little fix here or there. We are in big trouble. We need to make big changes, and the kind of courage that is bringing you together for this kind of conversation is exactly what this society needs, and the progress you make, however long it takes, will be an inspiration to the other communities around the country that are, like you, trying to figure out a genuine new way forward, because what they've tried to do otherwise, staying within the old rules, hasn't worked. I'm sitting here, and when I finish with you now, I'm going back to writing an introduction to a new book, new edition, of something called Cooperation Jackson. This is in Jackson, Mississippi, where the people in that community are developing an economic development program based on worker co-ops, because every other effort to bring economic development to that city, which is the capital of the state of Mississippi, has not worked. And not the least bit of beauty that comes out of this, besides the focus on worker co-ops, is that the leadership is being taken by African Americans, which for an American makes it all the more impressive as something for us to celebrate alongside of the efforts like your own.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is so exciting, and I'm so glad that you brought in meaning, because to me, in addition to all the maybe theoretically more practical issues that we're addressing, we're talking about co-ops, the thing that gets me the most excited is the meaning making that comes with this redefining what work can be and is, and our relationship to work. So I just think that this moment where things, you know, are crumbling, such a huge opportunity to reinvent what we're doing. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for returning to San Luis Obispo. Hopefully we'll make you proud, and you can write a book on San Luis Obispo someday.
Right. And I hope soon,
part of the United States.
and I hope soon we can all travel again and I can come and visit you out there.
That would be wonderful. We'd love to have you again. So thank you so much for all of that.
My pleasure.
All right.
Absolutely my best wishes for your conference.
Thank you so much. All right, and now we're going to transition to the local conversation about co-ops and listen just briefly to some of our co-op leaders here on the Central Coast. So I believe we have all these folks on the call. So we are going to start with Jack Shepard from the Slow Food Co-op. Zach Shepard, right? See here, Travis?
That's right.
Okay, hi, Zach.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So yeah, hi, I'm Zach Shepard. I'm the general manager of Slow Food Co-op. We're a consumer co-op here in Slow. Grocery store established in 1978, just off of Victoria Avenue.
Thanks for being on the call, Zach.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I love the co-op. It's great. It's a really sort of, I would say, low barrier to entry for those of us that are members or want to be. So I would encourage people to look at their website and check it out and go over there and shop there as well. You guys have also done a really beautiful job during COVID, and also making things like waiting in line with your mask on really fun through a lot of your messaging. So thank you for that. All right, and then now we will ask Lydia Francis, the board member of the Paso Robles Food Cooperative, to share a little bit.
Yes, hi, I'm Lydia, and I am a board member of the Paso Food Co-op. We are a startup, so we would very much like to open a cooperative grocery store here in Paso Robles. We want to benefit the community and hire local workers. We want to help to support local producers and support our community as best we can.
That's wonderful, Lydia. If people would like to pitch in that effort, how can they best find you?
We do have a website, www.pasofoodcooperative.com. We have a Facebook, and we also have an Instagram account.
All right, good job hitting all those points. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And is Kelly on the call, Travis? Did she make it?
I don't believe so, Heidi.
Okay. I just want to share then briefly, I think is super exciting. It combines three of my favorite things, bikes, food, and co-ops, right? And I guess it doesn't have to be food, but it's the Slow Bike Co-op. And so there's some folks that are starting this right now, and I think it's just in its formation stages, and Travis, you can correct me if that's wrong, but these are folks that will go and pick up, I think primarily groceries, but probably delivery of any other type. And maybe Travis, you can speak a little bit more to that. But that's kind of an exciting and fun new co-op here, the Slow Bike Co-op. I don't know if they have a website, but I have seen them on social media. And so I think you can find them there. And then finally, Travis Higgins will be sharing a little bit about what's going on here locally in terms of the landscape here on the Central Coast with co-ops.
Thank you, Mayor Harmon. Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be on this call. I'm fairly new to cooperatives, but what strikes me is that if you look hard enough, they're really all around us. Besides the Slow Food Co-op, we have strong credit unions here locally. Some of you may be members. They're member-owned banks, Ceslock, Slow CU, Coast Hills. We have retail co-ops like Ace Hardware and REI. Farm Supply is, locally is owned. It's a store owned by farmers. Our local libraries are part of a cooperative system that was founded in 1964. And I'm looking to add to that mix with a tech worker co-op. So we're working to get a group of people organized to provide services, anything from digital marketing to software development. An example would be making sure that Kelly Knox and the team at the Slow Bike Delivery Co-op has the logistical software support that they need to deliver the goods. And I'm looking forward to meeting and speaking more to all of you. Thanks to all the panelists, and I'm happy to be here.
All right, thank you so much, Travis. Is there a place that folks can find you if they're interested specifically in learning more or working with you?
Absolutely, you can go to slowtech.coop.
Okay, and I see some Rich has added the bike co-op in the chat, and then the Slow Tech co-op in the chat as well. So folks that are here can go ahead and click on that and find out more information there. So thank you so much, Travis. All right, and now Adam Trott. So Adam, we're excited to hear from you for sure, and I know you have a lot to say. And I think the main question is that we're asking is that how can we transform the Central Coast into a cooperative economy? Just a small question for you, Adam. If you could tell us in 15 minutes or less how to do that, we would really appreciate it.
Excellently said, Heidi, and thanks again. Great to be here. Yeah, Ed, there was a great introduction. Thank you for it. My name is Adam. I have a background in political and in union organizing in New York City and Detroit. I ended up working at Collective Copies, and we turned our minds to economic democracy, not just unions and political democracy. And in fact, I think that economic democracy will inform the others. So we wanted to talk today about, yes, having a model that's really working with your democratic values, where you can have your voice in a community-owned enterprise through different forms of cooperatives. So Professor Wolff was kind enough to go over some of the troubles we have with our capitalist economy. I'm asking different questions from that standpoint. Hey, can we have a model that does have democracy, that has accountability to the people involved? And for me, that's cooperatives. Now, co-ops have been around the world in humans for millennia. What's interesting about the Rochdale pioneers in the 1840s is that England was rapidly industrializing. This group of out-of-work weavers and activists were also abolitionists. They were also for religious freedom, and they were also for dispersing the vote. They wanted suffrage. This group also put together the beginning of the identity of what cooperatives are today. This is for me, it's a very motivating thing to have the world come together of the cooperative movement to determine their own identity. The International Cooperative Alliance on this slide here is really, for me, a key in being able to say, hey, we've got what's necessary for having a shared identity, for having a shared group, and for having a model that we can use for different enterprises, whether they're food or the other things that we were talking about with the introduction. We've got hundreds of leaders and thinkers in the cooperative movement, but I wanted to highlight a couple. And to have Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, to have W.E.B. Du Bois, a personal hero of mine, who grew up about an hour away from where I am, A. Philip Randolph, leader of the Sleeping Car Porters, they all cherish cooperatives in a special way. And one of those reasons is its flexibility. It can be worker cooperative like Collective Copies. It can be consumer cooperative like Slow Food Co-op. It can be producer co-op like, say, Land O'Lakes, or other farmer cooperatives that we've got. And I know a bunch in my area, and we'll do some more work in yours. You can have multi-stakeholder. And this, for me, is a way of the future, to have all stakeholders join together to work on these entities. We already went over some of this where Travis was talking about this, where co-ops are more popular than we think. There's 1 billion of them worldwide. And I just want to say that we might associate cooperatives with one particular store in our community or one particular activity. They are survival mechanisms around the world. And the United States is still learning about how to apply this to provide our own security, to provide our own economic benefit. Another reason I think cooperatives are really important is that we've got a values coupling. So if you want to talk co-op, you're talking about the values. If you want to talk co-op, you're talking about principles. And yeah, we might see equity and equality and solidarity all over socially responsible investing. Could be all over Amazon.com storefront, on their webpage. It could be almost anywhere. 180 years ago, this was new material. And cooperatives have a way of standing by these principles and values that has integrity. And it's not just window dressing, it's the actual model. So I want to talk about one of those principles today. Principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives. One of my colleagues, Karen Miner of St. Mary's University, calls this the superpower. What's so super about it? Well, you got a couple of pieces of information here on the slide, but this is where I think profound change can happen. If we want to address systems, we have to think as a system. We can't just think about one entity, one business, or one town. We have to think systemically. How that's going to happen for me is to be able to, just like Heidi said, have cooperatives of these businesses work together towards larger goals that the community is talking about, that the community wants. That's what makes these co-ops work. So, examples. If you've heard of Mondragon, throw your name in the chat for me. I just want to get a sense about who knows about this. I was lucky enough to visit Mondragon in 2008. Couple of great pieces of information about Mondragon. Started in the 50s from a Catholic priest who saw how challenging things were for his community. Basque region, as you know, is separatist. They wanted their own country. They did not want to be in Spain. So they tried to start their own economic entities. Here we are, 60, 70 years later, billions in sales, 100,000 employee members, over 200 co-ops working together in one entity that's all run by workers and their representatives. This is one big worker co-op. They've got hospitals, high-tech industry. They build washers, they build refrigerators. They've got high schools, they've got post-grad. They can do anything. Another example, and I wanted to talk about the region of Emilia-Romagna partially because of its unique role in working with legislators. In Italy, you have to go no further than the Italian Constitution, Article 47, that talks about how important co-ops are. After World War II, after the devastation that communities felt in Italy, they said, hey, how are we going to rebuild our own country? No one's going to come to our rescue the same way they did in other areas of Europe. So they started talking about co-ops, and it's working. Here's a couple of things that I think are important. Emilia-Romagna is right in the middle of the top of the boot. And they've got a region that's about the size of maybe half of California. So it's not far from what you and I are talking about tonight. They've got 7,500 co-ops in a region of that size. 2/3 of them are worker cooperatives. Many of them are over 100 years old. You're talking about intergenerational assets passing from family member to family member, mother to son, son to daughter, and onward. And I was lucky enough to go there too. It's an inspiration to see what people are doing in these levels. Wanted to give a couple of ideas on what we're learning from what we're calling these co-op complexes. Clear co-op identity, gathering voice from community members, making sure there's multiple layers of participation to have checks and balances on these governance models, integrated investment and vision. And one thing to really keep clear, these are worker-led institutions, and when they work across sector, are community-led institutions. I wanted to have one example of what's happening in Italy. They are world leaders in food. The town Parm, that's where Parmesan comes from. You're talking about food, you're talking about fresh food in Italy. They are leaders in having low food miles. Here's one of the reasons why. Not only do Italians care about their food and they're encouraged to farm locally, but they have associations regionally, like Emilia-Romagna, and nationally, where you can say, where consumers go to their consumer cooperatives and say, I want local lettuce, local peppers, local apples, local tomatoes, and we want them within a certain food mile, say 50. Then the consumer co-ops go to their associations and they learn these data, and they go to the farmers and say, hey, this is what we need. Can you do it? And they work together to deliver on these community concerns. Part of that is due to their relationship to legislators. Now, these are great big complexes that had support. I want to talk about something smaller that's going to be, I think, a great example for what SLO can do in the Central Coast Alliance. I was lucky enough to be around a group of cooperative leaders in 2005 that wanted to have a voice in bigger issues, not just their own business. They took the principle of saying, hey, if we can run our own businesses, we can run our own support and development organization to build our cooperative economy. You can see Larissa here, she's a current board member. You can see a group below Larissa in the photo saying, hey, they just converted another business and we supported them. A couple of things that VOC is doing that I think are social innovations that SLO can do. One, you have access, you'd build channels to capitalize. VOC started its own fund, actually based on a mechanism in the Italian movement. You can also have support and development mechanisms in these secondary co-ops to make sure people have places to go to talk about co-ops, trustworthy places with cooperators themselves to ask questions about what they want to know. And I think that's one of the reasons why VOC has supported so many, is that it's very approachable. Also, we really care about intercooperation. And that's what's so special about SLO right now. You've got already elements of what's needed to have the instruments and the development of different sectors working together. For example, out here in Massachusetts, we've got Valley Cooperative Business Association, where all cooperatives can find representation and voice and amplification. And I think that's one of the things we want to do in SLO. And that's what the Central Coast Alliance will do. Finally, education is a really important issue, whether it's to teach the public about cooperatives and the advantages they have, just like tonight, or also internal education, how we're going to govern each other, how to respect each other, what kind of issues we're going to talk about inside these businesses. So in closing, I just wanted to say that this is a special opportunity for us to have a group of cooperatives already existing and some startup opportunities to have a sympathetic and supportive legislative element in the mayor's office to say, hey, this is what we want to do together. And how that is where the profound change happens again. Where we've got partnerships with mutual goals and members of the business community caring about these larger issues. We want to talk about systemic racism. We have to have business involved in that. We want to talk about rampant unemployment. We have to have the business community participating. Essentially, we just have to have our economic models mirror our values, and that's what cooperatives are doing. And a secondary co-op makes sure everyone knows about it, how to get involved. So Heidi, I think that's it for my little presentation. Here's my little final slide about how co-ops benefit and how individuals can benefit from secondary co-op. But thank you so much for the time. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for that. I have a million questions, and I know we want to open it up to some of the folks here that are here on our call to answer questions too. So if you have a question, if you can add it into the chat, I'm happy to ask it. But while we're waiting for that, I wanted to hear a little bit more. One of the things that I think is really exciting and feels a little bit, I'm going to call it low-hanging fruit in terms of transitioning um, or like a, individually owned business into a co-op, is that we have a lot of folks that are probably getting ready to retire in our community. Can you talk just a little bit about that and how, if I'm a business owner, why would I want to potentially sell to my employees as opposed to sort of selling on the so-called open market? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And Heidi, you couldn't have picked an easier and better example of low-hanging fruit. So one of the things that co-ops recognize, and I think a lot of business owners do now too, is the hard work it takes to keep these businesses going. The hard work it takes to continue to serve customers and stakeholders, especially through these big challenges. The reason why to convert is because we want to keep that infrastructure and we want to maintain the employment, the tax base, and the revenues and the service to communities that those businesses represent. And we want to do it in a way that retains it for generations to come. Co-ops are going to root this kind of civic-minded business acumen in communities. It's going to root wealth in communities. We're going to relocalize economic power into the members of these cooperatives. So yes, and again, the Valley Alliance has been fortunate enough to support 7 conversions out here. It's fantastic, and all within about a 40-mile radius. It's not rocket science. Education, intercooperation are the keys here.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so if I'm a business owner, is there any reason I wouldn't do that? I mean, from a fiscal perspective, am I going to be taking a little bit of a loss potentially, but it's sort of the right thing to do? Or is there literally kind of no reason not to transition, at least offer that sort of right of first refusal potentially to my employees as I'm getting ready to retire out of my business?
Yes, thank you. It can be a very sensitive time. People leaving the businesses they've been involved in for years or decades. And we really, as cooperatives, we really care about that experience. The reasons to not do it are because you'd rather close. And, I respect that decision, but I actually don't think there's a lot of business owners who feel that way. And I know that it can be not something that's in the newspaper every day. So it feels new. But I'm here to tell you, again, it's not rocket science. We do this all the time. There's dozens of conversions to worker cooperatives and other forms of co-ops happening right now in the United States. And we're here to make that conversation happen.
Okay, great. I may have missed it, but I'm not so far seeing direct questions in the chat. So Travis, I don't know if you've popped on because you have a question.
I do.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Adam, thanks so much for being on the call.
Thank you,
it's great
Travis.
to hear from you and from your story. Can you tell us a bit about just getting started, a little bit more about Vox's story and what stuck first in terms of a need and services in Vox's case? What were the first things to solve? Just how did Vox get off the ground? If you could maybe just elaborate on that a bit.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great question. What we found is that there were, a couple of us would actually just go to all the co-ops in the area. We would just say, hey, can we stop by or attend a meeting for a couple minutes? We found that there were 3 main things that people wanted to be involved in and didn't have an effective way to get involved. It's one thing for a cooperator like us to be chilling on a Saturday night talking about how to get involved with democratic economics. We have to be the leaders in building channels so participating is easy. And what the Valley Alliance said was, okay, we want to do shared marketing. You want to be sure that people know you're a co-op, that you're doing this work to be democratically run. We're going to get that message out with shared marketing. We do radio ads, print ads, social media, websites. Another one, we want to make sure you're educating yourselves and your public. And this one can really be easily overlooked, especially at the beginning when budgets are tight and things are challenging. Again, it's great to rely on an association like the Valley Alliance to say, hey, what do you already have in the can where you can just talk to potential members? But educating is a really important issue because things change and we have to stay up with the times. And then a last one is people really wanted to see more co-ops. You know, a lot of people work really hard all day to make their co-op work, and they wanted to participate in a mechanism that they were also a part of. Say, yeah, we want more of this in our town. We want more of this in our region, in our county, in our state. And that's really where VOC took off.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat. Let's see. Can a workshop co-op succession planning be co-sponsored with the chamber? Jerry?
Is
maybe,
that, yeah, is that to say, is that question about can we partner with the chamber to make sure they're informed about the opportunities of succession?
Maybe. I know that the questioner tends to have a focus on housing. As an expertise on, I would say, and a very, Jerry, I hope you don't mind me speaking for you, but I know in land trusts and that sort of thing, but that doesn't seem like exactly where the question is. But Jerry, I would just say too that, if you don't mind me answering, from a local perspective, that I think absolutely that we can and will be partnering with organizations like the Chamber, if you're familiar with the local economic effort called REACH, that has very big goals, you know, very big, shiny, I guess I'm going to say, ideas about Vandenberg Air Force Base and all these kind of things. Really, again, you know, in some ways trying to transition out of Diablo Canyon being one of our major employers into finding another major employer. So kind of using that same model that I think a lot of us are wondering if that's actually really working, especially for most of us. And so I think while they still probably will continue to focus on those kind of big employer opportunities, we can definitely talk to them about adding in this conversation. And I think, you know, so much is not about either or, right? It's about yes and. So yes, of course, some folks are going to be much more interested in conversations about big employer opportunities like a Vandenberg Air Force Base type of conversation. And there's going to be a lot of us that are looking for something different. And the co-op idea, I think, can be absolutely added in a cohesive way to some of those conversations at the Chamber of Commerce and other entities. We're lucky here, Adam and others that are not local. I know every time I hear the word chamber, it can get cringy because the national chamber is has a lot of room for growth. But the local chamber here is actually fairly progressive and does a pretty great job. So I think that they would be open to this conversation. Let's see. Okay. In business, timely decisions are critical and many need to be made quickly. How does the timeliness of decisions in a co-op compare to an individually owned, managed business? How does that compare?
This is one of my favorite questions. And hi, Terry, thanks a lot for making time. So yeah, the stigma and worker co-ops have to do with this. The stigma is we spend a lot of time talking about what color to paint the walls and who's going to order the toilet paper. But I want to share with you the examples that I know. When I joined Collective Copies, we had 2 shops. One was in a town called Northampton, and there were 5 printers there when we started in '99. 5 years later, there were 3, and 10 years later, there were 2. And I think that we hung in there and we stayed connected because we're agile. Not only were our meetings just monthly, but they weren't long. I think with the right amount of education and intercooperation, you've got an experience and a touch and an acumen that says, okay, if there's not new information on this issue, we're not going to cover it. If there is new information, we'll do so. If we don't have to take up meeting time, you'll just read up beforehand. So I just want to say that one of the reasons why we want to have good governance and education is to address things like this. Decision-making can be, like anywhere, really challenging if we're not educating ourselves and holding ourselves accountable. But for me, that's a hallmark of what cooperatives are doing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that also the American sort of, I was going to use the word gestalt, I'm not sure that's the right word, but attitude and approach is so like faster, you know, faster is implicitly better, right? And I think that sometimes we get in an urgency mindset and to our detriment. I was just hearing a beautiful story about a co-op. It's in the Bay Area called Slice of New York. I believe that's the title, right? And they were talking about how important it's been and how helpful it's been to have this cooperative structure in this time of great unprecedented changes and uncertainty, and how they've been able to work as a group to make decisions that they felt good as a group in terms of their own health and safety issues, and then how they wanted to operate as a business. For example, making a decision as a group to close for a week after working so hard for months in this time of uncertainty. And it was, to me, so much of what we're talking about, as I said before with Dr. Wolff, it's not just about, this isn't about jobs. That's not the word we're talking about, right? We're talking, to me, about meaning. I'm just so interested in meaning making and how do we create meaningful lives for ourselves. And the co-op model seems like it gets at so many things that we thought or think work is about, but so few of us are actually experiencing those types of meaning making opportunities in our work environment. And so maybe at times there might be a slower process, it would seem, than if you're just, an individually owned corporate or business. But in the long run, it seems like you're saving time and creating meaning in the process that you're going through. Okay. Any other questions that folks have? I'm not seeing an additional question. I know we just have a couple minutes. I have a real question for myself, from someone who's in a policy-making position. What's the one or the couple of policies that you've seen be effective on the local level that cities can do to support the creation and support of cooperatives?
This is another favorite question of mine, Heidi. And I'm just going to enter one thing in the chat myself. Help us keep the conversation going between co-ops and legislators by visiting a website.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can happen. One is just to educate city council, legislators, and the community about what co-ops are doing already. Another one is to say, hey, here's a vision of our regional economic planning. How can we bring in partnerships so that we're investing in economic models that are going to be retained? Mm-hmm. Every piece of data we see, co-ops last longer every time. Mm-hmm. So we want to keep that going. Another one is procurement. A lot of places, including Mexico City, Distrito Federal has a procurement model for their city in their district, and that supports a lot of cooperatives, a lot of them run by women.
I mean, that should be a no-brainer. I mean, for folks, for some folks may or may not have the depth of that word or that terminology, but it's basically shop local, right? I mean, it's so for big organizations like a city organization, our big employers like hospitals, the universities, et cetera, we could all be joining together in a local procurement strategy that would support, in our case, probably the creation of a new business, because we probably don't have an existing business that can meet a lot of those needs that our big organizations have. But we could get together to make a commitment that could birth a new local co-op here with some commitments to doing as much of that procurement and that local purchasing as possible.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees. I just want to reiterate that co-ops actually have always been a good idea, and now, though, more than ever, it really seems to me it's truly time to reimagine what is necessary and possible in our country and in our communities. And we can emerge from this economic crisis brought on by COVID-19 with greater resiliency and equity for workers, businesses, and our communities. And so the key to building a sustainable local economy is to nurture a diverse set of employers that operate in multiple industries. Employee ownership preserves local companies, builds stronger businesses, and creates a path to business ownership. And it's wealth generating opportunities for employees and their families. That's key. We could talk a lot about that another time. So, and at a time where we are having much needed conversations about equity. This is one of the mechanisms that we could be utilizing here on the Central Coast to, again, invite and support minority-owned businesses here at a time that we're really being asked to meet this moment in terms of creating belonging here in our community. We can create a human scaled economy, one that operates here at the local level, and one that not only creates meaningful jobs, but creates a meaningful life for everyone. So thank you again for sharing your Saturday night with us. This is the beginning of a really great and exciting conversation. And so we will be scheduling a follow-up or organizational meeting in the future. So stay tuned. And thanks again. Thank you again to everybody. Stay well.